All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers in the group. Thanks for joining. This talk, Hacking Around, is basically everything I've learned from about 14 years of raising capital for startups. So let's get into it. Just by a very brief background on myself, I run a startup called Foundersuite, which most of you are already familiar with. We make a set of CRM tools, an investor database, and an investor newsletter tool for helping you raise money and communicate with your investors. We launched it in 2016, and since then our users have raised over $750 million in seed and venture capital, so that's pretty exciting for us to hear. But before that, I spent about 12 years as fractional CFO working with startups, helping them raise money. And about half the time we were successful in raising money, about half the time we failed. So this talk is basically everything I've learned from many successes and failures in fundraising. And I always like to start off with how not to do it. Hunter Walk is a VC here in San Francisco, and I just love this quote, right? He's like, will you intro me to investors is too broad to be acted upon. But this is how a lot of founders approach fundraising. They say, all right, time to go raise some money. They just start asking everyone they know, hey, can you intro me to some investors? And, there's two problems. One, it's too broad to be acted upon by the person you're asking. And number two, it's putting the work, the hard work of figuring out who you should be talking to on the shoulders of the other person, where really that's your job as CEO. And when I was doing this as fractional CFO, companies would hire me to do this, and it was not unusual for me to put in 50 or even 100 hours doing the research and building that target list. So this is too unfocused. Instead, I present to you kind of an alternative borrowed from the sales playbook, right? If you've ever been in sales, especially B2B sales, it follows a pretty straightforward approach. You build a list of leads. You qualify those leads, make sure they're a good fit for what you're selling. You engage with them, and ultimately you drive them towards a close, yes or no. And we can kind of expand on that metaphor with our funnel, right? We talk about sales funnels, we talk about investor funnels, but it's basically the same thing. From a high level view, you're building this large list of potential investors, then you're qualifying that list, you're screening, filtering, removing those that aren't a good fit. If you're pitching venture funds, venture firms, you also want to find the right person at that fund, right? You don't go just pitch a fund, you need to find like a decision maker, a champion, typically a partner at that fund, and identify them. Then of course it's figuring out once you've figured out who to target, it's the next step is figuring out how to reach them. And in fundraising, it's really all about the warm introduction, which we're going to get into a little bit later. Those introductions lead to pitch meetings. Those pitch meetings lead to hopefully deeper dive pitch meetings, getting into due diligence and term sheets. You negotiate the term sheets, and ultimately you're selling shares of your company. So, fundraising really just is another sales process, and we can break it into its step-by-step components. And I find that when we do it like this, it takes away a lot of that anxiety and stress that a lot of founders have, who haven't raised money before. So let's do it step by step. Step number one is building that top of the funnel. Especially if you're raising an angel or seed round, it's really a numbers game. I always tell founders you need at least 100 target names on your list, but realistically for most startups, that's quite a bit, even more than 100. When I was raising, our seed round for Foundersuite, I pitched over 200 investors and ended up with one seed VC firm and 10 angels. And so you can do that math. That's about a 5% conversion rate. And that's actually pretty typical. A 5% conversion rate is pretty typical unless you have, exceptional traction or growth or some other criteria. But that also means you're getting rejected 95% of the time. Sometimes that's a shock to founders who haven't done this before, or maybe they've been successful in other parts of their life. Excuse me, just one sec, I have to shut my door. Sorry about that. So, you're getting rejected 95% of the time, and that further emphasizes why you need a really healthy top of your funnel because you're going to get rejected a lot. How do we build that top of the funnel? A couple different sources. AngelList is a good place to start. You can search and browse around AngelList by different criteria. I think there's about 25,000 investors in AngelList. It tends to skew pretty angel focused, as you'd expect, but there are VCs in there as well. Within Foundersuite, we're building out an investor database pretty aggressively. Right now, we've got about 21,000 VC funds and about 100,000 angels, family offices, fund of funds, PE firms, hedge funds, kind of alternative investors. Our database is very broad, but it's fairly shallow. Basically, we've collected publicly available information, like a little description or bio, a photo usually, and then there's social links. And so the way you would use this basically is search by like a market, your market tag, and then kind of browse the list. And if someone looks interesting, we're kind of putting the second layer of research onto you by clicking on their LinkedIn or their web page, you know, kind of qualifying them, so to speak. And if someone looks good, you add them to your funnel over here, add to research. So a pretty quick way to start building that target list. Let's see here. CrunchBase is another good resource. The way I like to use CrunchBase is I make a list of 10 or 12 companies that are similar to mine but not directly competitive, and plug each one into CrunchBase, and I see who funded them at the relevant stage that I'm at. Another way to use CrunchBase is if you have an investor, you can plug that investor in here and you can see who they co-invest with. So that's CrunchBase, and there's a free version and a paid version. Lots of other places to build this funnel. Remember, this takes, 20 to 100 plus hours of research, so get ready to dig into it. But PE Hub, Inside Venture, and Venture Pulse are newsletters. You can subscribe to them. They're free. And basically, when a startup raises a new round, they'll announce it in these newsletters. Also, when a new venture firm is announced or when a venture fund raises a new fund, they'll often announce it in these things. So that's useful to kind of keep an eye on, right? The best fund to be pitching is one that just raised a new fund. They've got a lot of money to put to work. And, I spend 5 minutes a day with my coffee kind of just skimming these things, seeing who's getting funded. Conferences can be pretty useful, especially if you're in like a new emerging space like blockchain or cannabis or drones or whatever, is hot of the day. A lot of conferences sprout up, and investors love to build their brand by getting out there on the speaking circuit. So check out the agenda. Quora, TechCrunch, Medium, I think you guys are all familiar with these things. Quora is kind of interesting to poke around on. People have answered a lot of questions like who's the best, e-commerce investor in LA. PitchBook and CB Insights are kind of the gold standard databases. Really deep data. You can get lots of stuff like valuation and who were the attorneys on the deal and all kinds of really deep information. They're very expensive though. I think PitchBook is $15,000 or $20,000 a year, and I want to say CB Insights is more like $50,000 a year. So not cheap to access these. If you have a friend that will let you sit at their computer a bit and poke around, some pretty amazing data in there. And then mining your personal network. I'm going to show you 2 ways to, as I call it, kind of scrape your own personal network to help build your funnel. So the first is by using LinkedIn. So this is my LinkedIn page. Let me shut that. This is my LinkedIn page. This is just my home page on LinkedIn. I'm not on the premium. I'm just on a free plan. And I will just do a search on a generic term like angel investor. Okay, so 5,782 results. That's pretty huge, and really that's too many. So what I'll do is I'll apply a couple of filters. I'll click second degree connections, and then let's pick a location and apply that. So much more manageable, 570 results. So this is showing me 570 people that I have at least one mutual connection with, sometimes more than one, that call themselves an angel investor in their title and that are in San Francisco Bay Area. So I should theoretically be able to reach any of these people because I have a mutual connection. That doesn't mean they're all a good fit for what I'm pitching. So what I want to do next is actually kind of right-click anyone who looks interesting. I'll right-click and open them up in a new tab or new window, and I just open up 50 or 100 at a time, and then I'll browse through, and anyone who looks relevant to what I'm doing, what I'm pitching, I'll add them to my funnel. And I will also make a note of who my best mutual connection is, right? Or maybe even sometimes a couple people in case the first one doesn't respond. Who's my strongest connection? So that's a way of scraping your own LinkedIn network to build your funnel. Another way I'm going to show you is something I did with Foundersuite. So this is my investor board, and this is basically my investor funnel. And so what I don't know if you can read it, but I want to point out this column right here. This is called Steve B. Leads. And so what I did, I came over here. Doesn't LinkedIn limit the number of searches you can do? Good question. I have not been blocked. I mean, I think like this is one single search, right? Angel investor, location, and second degree connection, and then you can just keep scrolling down. I guess if you're doing lots of searches or if it thinks you're a spider or a bot, they're going to block you. I have not been blocked, though. Yeah, I haven't paid for LinkedIn in a long time, but it's a good question. Okay, so let me just show you this real quick. So Steve B. Lead. So what I did is came over here, created a column called Add New Column. I titled it Steve B. And Steve B. is Steve Bennett. He's one of my advisors. He's a professor at San Jose State. He knows lots and lots of people. And then I invited Steve to be a member of my account, which is under Settings and Team. And I said, hey, Steve, I made you a column, called it Steve B. Leads. Can you populate this column with some people from your Rolodex? And so he came into my account. He added 10 or 15 people from his network to my column. And I repeated this process with 5 or 6 other advisors. And, I generated about 50 or 60 good, solid, warm leads by having a structured process for asking them to open up their Rolodex, right? That's kind of the key. Having a structured process for asking your advisors to open up their Rolodex means it's going to happen. Let me table that about the Chrome plugin. We do have a Chrome plugin, and we have a mobile app. The Chrome plugin's not super useful quite yet. It's live, but it's not super useful. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. Okay, so we've talked about this. And, basically, you've got to kind of tune your radar into looking for investors, and you start to, get in the groove. You'll start to find them all over the place. All right, I showed you that. So now that we've built this list of maybe 200, maybe even more investors, we actually want to start removing people from this list. Going back to our sales metaphor, the best salespeople spend a lot of time qualifying their leads. They don't just chase every prospect. They qualify them, they rank them, they prioritize them, and we want to do that with investors. It's even more important when doing this with investors than in just a salesperson, right? Because you're going to be in bed with these investors for the next 5 to 7 years of your life. So you want to make sure you're, with the right people. So anyone who's invested in a competitor, you just want to automatically cross them off your list. If they're ethical, they won't talk to you. If they're unethical, they'll send your pitch deck to your competitor. If you're pitching venture funds and they have not raised a new fund in the last 2 or 3 years, they're probably only doing follow-on deals to their existing portfolio companies. It doesn't mean they won't meet with you. They probably will want to meet with you because they want to keep on touch, on top of what's going on. But they often aren't making active investments. And you can waste a lot of time pitching venture funds that don't have dry powder or fresh capital to put to work. Same with angel investors. If you plug an angel investor into AngelList and all their deals are from, 2015, they're probably taking a break. Doesn't mean you shouldn't pitch them or even get, practice your pitch on them, but just you want to be, pitching and targeting both VC funds and angels that are actively investing, right? Wrong sector, wrong stage, wrong geographic location. This stuff should all be pretty intuitive. Obviously, if you're a medical devices company, you would not be pitching a financial services venture fund. If you're seed stage, you would not be pitching a growth capital fund. That's, later stage. And, some VC funds do have very specific regional charters, right? We invest in the New York tri-state area, or we invest in Pacific Northwest startups, right? And then finally, bad reputation. There are two sites that are kind of like Yelp for VCs. One is called thefunded.com. It's been around since like the mid-90s, and it looks like it's from the mid-90s. It's pretty funny in its design. But there's some interesting information on there. A newer one is called knowyourvc.com. I don't think it's quite as extensive, but, design's a little fresher. These are like Yelp for VCs. My only comment with these sites is a lot of the reviews are left by, founders that were rejected by that fund. So there's kind of a lot of negative bias to it, perhaps. So just take it all with a grain of salt. And so, generally, as a rule of thumb, I tell founders, you should be crossing off about 25 to 30% of your initial target list, removing the bad fits, the people who aren't a good fit. And the reason that's so important to qualify is because, A, it's really easy to waste a lot of time driving down, setting up meetings, arranging the meetings, going down and pitching investors that aren't a good fit, and you're just wasting your time. And number two is so much of fundraising is about getting momentum going for your deal. And it's almost impossible to get momentum going for your deal if you're pitching poor quality targets, investors that aren't a good fit. You want to be pitching high quality targets. That's how you get momentum going for your deal. So don't skip this step. Okay, so let me take a drink of water. Now that we have this nice list of maybe it's down to 150 or 150 investors or so, now we want to actually figure out how to reach them. LinkedIn is probably still the key tool for this. Facebook sometimes is useful too, but basically you plug each investor into LinkedIn, or if you're using Foundersuite, we've collected their LinkedIn icon. You just click on that icon, opens up Tim's LinkedIn page, and then you see if you have any mutual connections to that investor. If you have more than one mutual connection, there's a hierarchy of who to ask. Number one is someone who has made Tim money in the past. Tim will take that introduction all day long and be super responsive. The little anecdote I always tell, when I was raising money, my son's preschool group, we had a dad's night out, and I got to know one of the dads who had just sold his company to Yahoo for $640 million, and he made a lot of people money. He made like 6 or 7 intros for me to investors, and every single one of those investors responded, I'm not even exaggerating, within 30 seconds or less. Like, it was the most responsive introductions I've ever got. Of course, I don't have too many of those type of intro sources, but someone that's made money for investors, always high on the list. Number two is someone that Tim has co-invested with in the past. This could be an angel investor or maybe another VC that has done deals with Tim. Number three on the list is someone that Tim has invested in, a portfolio company founder. And put a little check mark by this one because we're going to come back to it, but this is a really important one. Number 4 on the list is what I call the professional biz dev guys and gals. These are often people who work at the big law firms or accounting firms, and they know everyone in the startup ecosystem, right? That's their job. But they tend to make a lot of introductions, so sometimes the intro isn't as strong a signal. Where are we at? 5 on the list is someone that Tim met at a conference 2 years ago, and they connected, but they don't really know each other. Excuse me. So what do you do if you have 0 mutual connections to Tim? The best workaround is to pull up a couple portfolio company founders that Tim has invested in, reach out to them with a cold email, and say, hey, I see Tim has invested in you guys. I love what you're doing. I would love to hear what it's like, working with Tim. Any feedback you have, I'm really interested. And you get a dialogue going with that company founder. It's okay to ask for the introduction to Tim. And the reason this is actually a pretty effective hack is because that founder was in your shoes, 6 months ago or 3 months ago, whenever they raised money, right? They were doing the exact same thing. So they kind of have empathy for what you're doing. And that founder has a trusted relationship with Tim. They went through due diligence. Tim trusts that founder. He put money into it. So it's a good kind of backdoor way to getting the introduction. If you're not willing to kind of hustle like that, what do you do? Should you send a cold email? This is another question I get all the time. It's never been easier to find people's email addresses. There's tons of tools to look up email addresses. Tim's super easy to find, right? The problem with the cold email approach is that Tim is already getting 50 to 100 warm introductions a day from people on that hierarchy, people he trusts. So your cold email already has kind of a black mark on it that you were not willing to take the time to network your way into an introduction. And number two, these guys and gals are just overloaded with emails, so they often don't even respond or open up stuff that's cold, coming in cold. If you're going to do cold, just make sure it's very personalized, why you want to talk to Tim, why, short but very personalized. That's clearly not like an email blast. And don't use like MailChimp or any automated, system. That just is a red flag right away. Okay, I think we've covered that. This step also takes some time, right? I call it mapping your connections. I'm actually going to show you just something really quick. On my Foundersuite board, I have my research column, and then this is a custom column I made myself, qualified and mapped. This is where I move people out of research when I have qualified them that they do indeed invest in my space, my sector, my stage, and mapped means I've figured out some mutual connection to that, someone I can ask for an introduction. So I move them into qualified and mapped. So that's kind of like ready-made, teed up to go fundraise. Okay, next step is, we've got this list of 150. We've qualified them. We've mapped them. We're just about ready to go fundraise. We actually need a way of keeping track of all this activity. Again, fundraising is about getting momentum going. And to do that, you'll hear people say you got to run a process. Running a process means running a really efficient, disciplined, Navy SEAL style fundraise, where you're moving things along quickly, you're staying on top of everything, and you're not letting anything slip through the cracks. I used to build these spreadsheets for clients, which work fine for about the first week, but then they get pretty messy. You can probably guess where I'm going with this. This is why we built Foundersuite, which is a pretty simple CRM for fundraising. And I'll just show you a couple tips and hacks on using Foundersuite. It's the whole funnel, right? This is set up as a funnel metaphor. You've got contacted, pitched, diligence, committed, or said no. And really your job is to be moving these cards, these investor cards, from left to right through the stages of your funnel. The joke we make is, it's like a chess game. You're moving these pieces around the board. If you move them into the committed column, you win. If you move them into the no column, you lose. But practically speaking, the way I actually work on this is I'll come in, I'll block off 3 hours of an afternoon to just work on my contacted column or my pitched column. And it's, very specifically, it's like, all right, I've been introduced to Chris Farmer. What can I do to nudge this along to try and set up a pitch meeting? Or I've pitched Tim. What can I do to nudge this along to get into term sheet and diligence discussions, right? Like, is he waiting on things for me? Do I need to follow up? Do I need to sync up with his EA to set up another meeting? So you just kind of work on your funnel. And I'll just show you one other little bit, and we'll get back to our talk. A couple other best practices for doing this. If you're fundraising with co-founders or maybe your advisors are working with you, every investor, I believe, should have an owner, someone responsible for kind of driving that investor through the stages of your funnel. Obviously, taking notes is useful sometimes. Adding activities, right? So if you get a meeting set up with this guy, meet for coffee and then push it out to your calendar. So it not only is in your Foundersuite CRM, but it's also on your calendar, so everything stays on top. as you're, maybe sending him a pitch deck or term sheet or whatever it is, attach that as a file so it all gets logged here. And then lastly, you can connect your Gmail and in the not too far off future, Microsoft Outlook and Exchange, but currently just Gmail and BCC. So all the email conversations get pulled in. So basically, it's activities, notes, files, tasks, emails, all in one place. And then if you're a very organized person, you can see your macro or master to-do list, across all investors. And sometimes people will just come in and work on their to-do list. So this is really, it's been pretty useful for our customers to really run and drive their funnel. You can customize it as much as you want with columns and stuff like that, which is useful. And it has that database underneath it, so that's also useful. All right, so there's my sales pitch. Thank you for listening. Hope you give us a try. We put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this. Okay, so now let's just recap our steps. We built this funnel target list. We qualified it. We mapped our connection paths as best we can. We've loaded them all up into a CRM, hopefully Foundersuite or something else. And now we're just about ready to really actively get out there. But before we do that, let's just make sure our pitch and our model, especially our pitch, is awesome. One of the dumbest things I see founders do all the time is they go out fundraising with a crappy pitch. And it's just like one of these dumb things because you can't go back 2 months later and say, oh, hey, I've revised my pitch deck. Can I pitch you again? It doesn't work like that. You basically get, one shot, and impressions are everything, and many investors will make their decision in the first, 5 minutes of meeting you and hearing you. So it's critical that you go out there with a really solid pitch deck. I always tell founders, make sure you've given your pitch at least, 5 to 10 times in front of people who will give you honest feedback. And then even if you've done that, maybe your first couple pitches are probably throwaways or burners anyway. So maybe schedule those with, venture firms that haven't raised the new fund or angels that aren't really actively investing, just so you can get kind of your sea legs and get practice with your pitch before you start pitching the investors you really want, right? Get a couple practices in there. In terms of the model, you need at a minimum, let's say you're raising $1 million, you need to be able to articulate how you're going to spend that money and where that gets you as a company, and even better if you can show what your business model looks like at scale. So a solid pitch deck, a good model, and then usually like a one-pager teaser is pretty much all you need in terms of materials. All right, let me take a drink of water here, just a moment. So now we're ready for showtime. When doing the research of how you're connected to investors, a lot of times you'll find that many intro paths lead through just a few people. I kind of call these my power connectors. And Jeff Thomas, who works at NASDAQ, was one of my power connectors. A lot of people in my target list he knew. And so I put together an email like this to Jeff. Hey, Jeff, I'm doing my seed round. Do you know any of these people well enough to make an intro? And Jeff can just respond to this. I know Tom, I know Jessica, I know Wesley. I don't know Noah, Zaw's not doing any new deals. He can respond to this very easily, 5 minutes or less. Now contrast that to my very first slide of how not to do it. If I went to Jeff and said, hey, Jeff, I'm raising money, can you make any introductions for me? He would have to think about his entire universe of people he knows and make a list. And that's just too much work for my connector to do. Whereas this is very reactive and making it easy for him to respond. So for every person that he says, yes, I'm happy to make an intro, I create a new email thread that looks like this. Notice how short it is. Hey, Jeff, can you introduce me to target name? And then, a link, Foundersuite seed round, FFVC leading. We had a lead investor by this point, so I put that in the subject line. If I didn't have a lead investor, of course I didn't start out with that, I would put whatever is the single most exciting, sexy statistic about our business. Maybe it's a growth rate. Maybe it's a strategic deal. Whatever is like the single most exciting part about your business, put that in here as a teaser. Remember, these guys are getting 50 intros a day, so you want to kind of stand out. Okay. Jeff, good chatting with you. I'm raising a seed round. Here's what we do. We make this investor management and reporting platform. Here's a link to our website. You wouldn't believe how many entrepreneurs forget to include a link to their website in this, and they make the investor have to, Google it or hunt for it. And then the ask. Could you introduce me to target investor? And then the why. He's got a good track record. And then I noticed on LinkedIn that this guy went to the same very small college in Iowa that my dad did. So I put that in here as just a personalization token, so to speak. And then I include a link to our deck. And this is not the full deck. This is a high-level teaser deck. I don't remember exactly. I think it was like maybe six or eight slides. Didn't go into any, super secret information. Just a high-level teaser deck. And I like to include this because I want Clint to click through this, look at this, and if we're not a good fit for him, I want him to opt out up front, right? This is kind of another way of me qualifying this investor that he actually wants to take a meeting. And of course, this deck is hosted online. It's hosted on our own platform, of course, because we want to be dog fooding it. And then all Jeff has to do is click forward. Hey, Clint, Nate's a good guy. Do you want to take this intro? Send. Hey, Jessica, Nathan's a good guy. Do you want the intro? Send. He can fire off, 5 or 6 intro emails very, very quickly. So making it easy for your connector to do his or her job is very critical. Okay, so we're in full-on fundraising mode, hustle mode. If you haven't watched HBO's Silicon Valley Season 1, you have to watch this. This is like fundraising 101. It's so funny and so real. But the reason I show this slide is, just to put things in context, right? Richard is an introvert. He's an engineer. He just wants to be writing compression algorithms for his Pied Piper startup. But he's got to get out there and pitch all these guys who are very smart. They all went to Stanford and Harvard. They're all very successful. That's how they become investors. Many of them have very big egos, like this guy. And investing is what they do every day, all day long. So they're professionals at this, whereas for Richard, it's his first time. And that's kind of just the way things are for most founders, right? There's kind of this asymmetry or imbalance that you just have to deal with. The way to deal with that is, as I say, channel your inner hustler, whether it comes naturally to you or not, and also kind of treat it like a game. It's very, very stressful, so if you can treat it kind of like a game, it actually makes it a little bit more fun. So, some hustle tips. So this first one is doing the introductions in parallel, asking your connectors to make their introductions that you've teed up for them pretty much all around the same time frame. We call this the blitzkrieg approach. And what we're trying to do here is get momentum going on your deal. Another corny joke I always say is, when you walk into an investor's office, they have a detector on the door, and it can detect if you smell like momentum. It can detect if you smell like desperation. So you want to be walking in there smelling like momentum. The best way to get momentum is to be having a lot of meetings. And, every time you pitch an investor, they always say, so how's the round coming together? And to the extent you can answer that with, it's going great. We just started fundraising. I've got 10 meetings this week, 12 next week. We're running a pretty tight process using Foundersuite, of course. And, we're looking to close this off in the next 2 months. That's signaling to the investor that other people are interested in your deal. And you want to be signaling that other interest. You don't ever want to exaggerate or lie about it, but you want to be signaling whatever level of interest it is, whether it's meetings, later on, term sheets coming down, stuff like that. And the reason that's just so powerful is investors are motivated when they know other people are hunting the same deal. It's their natural reaction to do the opposite, which is just watch and wait a deal, right? If investors are not responding quickly to you, they don't sense any momentum or urgency in the deal. So you're trying to create that momentum. Okay, keep moving here. So your pitch, every time you go pitch, you should have someone, maybe your co-founder, taking notes, gathering feedback, and then you come back and work on your pitch deck and just revise it. I used to come back after pitching, I'd sit down, have a beer, watch Silicon Valley, and then, spend an hour on my pitch deck, and by the end, we're on version number 42. But it just got better and better and better throughout the time of fundraising. And, if you're getting momentum going and your pitch is getting better and better, these things kind of amplify each other. So you want to be constantly tweaking your pitch deck. Leveraging VCs off each other, we talked about that. That kind of applies to getting momentum. One guy I interviewed recently for our How I Raised It podcast series, really fascinating guy. He would have a pitch meeting, let's call it noon, with, Shasta Ventures, just as an example. And he would go into that meeting at noon and say, hey, I'm really, really excited to meet you, but just so you know, I've got to get out of here at 12:50 because I've got another pitch meeting with Sequoia at 1. Like, he would actually name drop who he was pitching next. And then that investor knows, they're kind of compressing that time frame. It really changes the dynamic if you're willing to be that bold. Excuse me. And then this last point here, sending out a regular progress update. I've been interviewing people for our podcast, and I've almost got 50 interviews done, and these are all successful people who've fundraised. And almost universally, they sent a regular newsletter to everyone they were talking to. And so I'll just emphasize that again. You should be sending a regular, short, 1 page or less update or newsletter to every investor that's still in your funnel that has not told you no. Obviously, if they say hard no, take them out of your newsletter distribution list. But everyone else who's still in your funnel should be getting a regular update from you. And just coincidentally, we have a tool for that, which I'll show you very, very quickly. Why don't more people do this? It's really powerful. Why don't more people do it? It's because it takes a little time, right? You've got to write an update. So we've come at it with our minimal viable update approach. Basically, it's 6 different sections with a signature. We give you some kind of coaching on what to write in each section. For prospective investors, you would take out challenges. So, the ones you're pitching, you would take out challenges and you would take out how you can help. Right, so now we're left with company summary. You would probably pull in a KPI table, and these are basically all your, key metrics that you want to be put in here. Maybe it's lifetime value, stuff like that. And then if you've got a cool product, pull that in as an image, right? Put your product in here, or maybe even a team shot. I see people putting like a team shot in here, a photo of their team, really powerful. And then you publish this, and I'll just show you what this looks like really quick. I'm actually writing my quarterly update as we speak. But this is what it looks like. It's very clean, very simple. The right one? Oh, there it is. So this is what it looks like. This is what investors get. You send out this link either using your own email or through the system. Investors get this. They can navigate around. Look, I included a link to our mobile app that we launched. I've got my KPI table in here. And then, it just looks clean, simple, and professional. It makes you look good. But the cool thing is I can then track and see who's actually reading my update. So if I've got my funnel of 50 or 100 investors and I'm sending out a monthly update, I can actually track and see who's opening it, who's reading it, and how long they're spending, which is a pretty good signal of interest. And then last but not least, you can use this same tool to put your pitch deck up here. I'll get to that question in just a moment. You can use the same tool to put your pitch deck up here, and it's a pretty basic format, but then I can send out a link to this pitch deck. This is what I used for that teaser deck that I would include. And then same thing, I can track and see who's opening that pitch deck. Let's see, let's get a question real quick. There's some funny ones in here. Yeah, people probably don't know what a Rolodex is. Let me save some of these questions to the end. We're actually getting pretty close to the end, if you guys don't mind, and then we'll just bang through the Q&A, if that is okay. All right, so send out your regular update, monthly update, 1 page or less. It will. The reason this is effective, let me actually emphasize that point. Every investor who's been investing for any amount of time has put money into a startup and then never heard from that founder again until the company is out of money. And they hate that. And so by sending a regular newsletter, you're showing them not only can you execute, because every update, has some progress in it, or it should, but you're also showing you can communicate. You're showing that even before they write a check, you're showing them, what's going on with the business, that you're a good communicator. Lastly here, this last point, the more you can treat fundraising like a full-time job, the more success you're going to have. It's very hard to get momentum going if you're just putting in 2 hours a week on your fundraise. The best founders, this is almost impossible, but the best founders I've seen, they give some of their duties to their co-founder, and so they just go in full-on fundraising mode for 2 months or 3 months and kind of push everything else onto their other team members so they can just concentrate on fundraising. And lastly, we've already talked about, this is extremely stressful. I actually thought I was getting an ulcer about 2/3 of the way when we were in due diligence. I actually asked my dad for a prescription to ulcer medicine because he's a doctor. Ended up not getting it because it was like $200 for the medicine. But, I actually thought I was getting an ulcer, and I've been fundraising for 12 years with startups. That's just how stressful it is. So acknowledge that's just the way it is. A couple more hacks here. Number one is we did some retargeting ads on Facebook to the investors we were talking to. One of my angels who wrote a $70,000 check did tell me he, every time he logged into Facebook, he saw Foundersuite. So maybe it had a subliminal effect. But really what we're doing with the retargeting and the monthly newsletter that I just talked about, and any PR, if you can get any PR or press while you're fundraising, what we're doing is we're just staying top of mind with these investors. These guys and gals are getting, as I mentioned, 50 to 100 intros a day. They're meeting with 25 startups a week. They just have a lot of noise coming at them. So the newsletter, retargeting, and PR can help you stand out from the noise. Number two is just, using an online tool like Foundersuite or DocSend or something else to track and see who's looking at your materials. The other advantage of putting your deck up online instead of sending an attachment is that you can constantly update it. And I find this to be really, really valuable. So even if I sent that investor a link to my pitch deck 3 weeks ago, I've probably made 10 updates to it since then, improvements. And so if he comes back 3 weeks later, he's always seen the latest, greatest version of my deck. Facebook, you might be able to find mutual connections there, possibly warmer than LinkedIn. A couple more things just to explore. AngelList syndicates. If you have over half your round committed, probably more like 2/3 your round committed, finding a syndicate could be a pretty good way to fill out the round. Syndicates are not great for initiating a round. They're good for filling out your round, in my opinion. Angel groups. Lots of angel groups out there, hundreds of them all over the world. The advantage of pursuing an angel group is you can get in front of 60 investors in one shot, do your pitch. The disadvantage is it usually takes a couple months. You got to apply, go through screening committee. There's a whole process that can take kind of a long time. And then equity crowdfunding. This is an interesting topic. Equity crowdfunding, it's like you hear all kinds of horror stories. You hear some success stories. I think, in my opinion, the bottom line is equity crowdfunding is an option. especially if you have maybe a product business, a consumer product, it can be pretty good. But there is a bit of a stigma to it, and you typically have to work just as hard to raise money on a crowdfunding site as if you would, you've got to hustle just as much, basically. I'm not going to go through this too much, but if you don't have a lead investor, what do? The short version is every time you pitch someone who's interested, get a conditional commitment from them. Say, how much would you put in and what are your conditions or conditional commitment, right? They say, I'll put in 50, but I'd want to see you have a lead investor. You just add up all these conditional commitments until you're oversubscribed. And then magically a lot of those those conditions will disappear and you can actually close the round. I've seen it happen pretty successfully. It generates that fear of missing out. So, okay, we're almost done here and then we'll get to the Q&A. I think I'm going a little long here. We've been fundraising for 2 months. You've been running the process. You're just hustling and kicking ass at this, hopefully. Now it's time to actually try and close the round and get back to building your business. So a couple tips on that. Every time you have a pitch meeting or pitch call, do these 2 things. First of all, don't finish the call or meeting until you've asked for their interest level. Like, hey, great meeting with you. Really appreciate your time. I'd love to hear, what your interest level is, what your typical check size is, and what are next steps or what is your process. And usually you get a generic answer to that. But if you get a response like, let me have you come in next week and meet my partners, that's a pretty good buying signal. So ask for those 3 things. Also ask them to pitch you a little bit as an example. Really enjoyed, telling you about my vision for Foundersuite and our goals here. I would love to hear how you, help your portfolio companies and how you would help me grow Foundersuite. And then just shut up, stop talking. Let them actually pitch you a little bit on, how they can help you. And the reason this is actually pretty powerful is every investor that's been doing it has lost out on a competitive deal, right? There were more investors trying to get into a startup than there were seats at the cap table. And so what you're doing is you're signaling that it's not automatic that this investor can come into your deal, that they might have to actually work to get into your deal. And this has a really powerful psychological effect, especially as you start to get momentum going on your round. As you get momentum, you get more confidence. As you get more confidence, it's much easier for you to kind of make the investor chase you. And it's crazy how this works. Once you kind of hit that tipping point of momentum, investors can get like piranha feeding frenzy coming after you. I've seen, it's pretty amazing. You sort of start off begging and chasing all these investors, and then they start chasing you. It's pretty funny. It's almost like a cartoon. Okay, it takes, multiple pitch meetings typically before you get a term sheet. But if you're on my general rule of thumb, if I've met with an investor 6 times, if we're on meeting number 7, this person's probably a tire kicker and not really serious. So I have kind of a 7 meeting rule. I don't, it's not hard and fast, but that's my general thing. And it typically takes like at least 3 to 6 months to raise money, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter if you're really efficient. But that's a pretty good expectation. Follow up frequently. It can be hard to get an actual no. There's a dynamic that's pretty common. I call it VC ghosting, where you have a great pitch meeting, you thought it went awesome, and then you never hear from that investor again. And my rule of thumb is I send like 2 or 3 follow-up emails. If I haven't got a response in 2 or 3, I consider them a no. I'm going to show you something that's actually kind of funny. I created a column in my Foundersuite. Excuse me. I have my hard no, and then I created a no response column. So this is where I move investors that just stop responding to me. And it's actually pretty common. It's probably the most common no is a stop responding. So I have a column for that. And then similarly, you get a lot of people saying, I like what you're doing, but you're too early for me. So I have a column here called Revisit for Series A, which is, people who do a little bit later stage. And so then when I do go raise that next round, I have a ready-made target list. Okay, almost done here. When someone does say yes, we want to do Program's handshake deal protocol. Program is Y Combinator. Basically what this means is, you meet someone for coffee, they say, I like what you're doing, put me down for 50. You just go back to your laptop and you write a little email saying, really enjoyed meeting you. Just to confirm, you're in for 50. Please write back confirming that. Excuse me. If they write back saying, yes, I'm in for 50, then you can pretty safely move them into the committed column. If they don't, they're still just a prospect and should be treated as such. Last but not least, if you're going to raise money, see it all the way through to the end. I know a lot of founders. It's a really tragic story. I've seen this tragic story happen numerous times where they start fundraising, they're all excited about it. They get 2 months into it, the founder's like tired of getting rejected constantly, right? It's pretty brutal. And maybe their customers are pulling them back into the business. And they just kind of take their foot off the gas pedal in fundraising. And then, one investor drops out, another drops out, and the whole thing collapses. And I've even seen companies run out of money because the founders sort of took their eye off the target with fundraising. So if you're going to do it, make sure you get it all the way across the finish line. Don't stop until those wires actually hit your bank account. And then putting this all in perspective, last slide. You raised $1 million. That's amazing. I'd love to hear about it, especially if you're a customer. But you realize that that's harder than it looks, right? And that buys you 12, 18 months of runway. That actually means you need to start fundraising again, 6 to 9 months from now with a higher set of metrics. So put it all in perspective, get out there, kick butt. And then very last but not least, we have a Facebook group called Funding Hacks, which not too active. It's not going to flood your Facebook with stuff, but it's some pretty interesting discussions in there. You do need to apply to join. We do that just to keep out, kind of riffraff and stuff like that. But please join that. And then we have this great podcast. I actually want to plug this on iTunes and SoundCloud called How I Raised It. And basically, I've been interviewing founders from all walks of life. We've got cosmetics to robots to, dentists and like all kinds of startups, not just, tech software. And I just go into detail, like, how did you raise this money? And it's the number of stories and different approaches is actually fascinating to me. I've learned a lot, even though I've been fundraising for, 12 plus years. So check out that podcast. It's pretty good. Okay. Now let's get to some of these Q&A. I apologize for going a little long today. And by the way, if you have questions, please just type into the chat box. Yes, I will send the recording. Okay, Naveen said, do you have a browser extension to help quickly add LinkedIn contacts? We do have a Chrome extension. You can find it in the Chrome marketplace for Foundersuite. It's not, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. We probably need to spend a few more development cycles on it and check it out. I loved your number 19. Are you sure everyone knows what a Rolodex is? Yeah, I'm dating myself, I guess, a little bit about that. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. That's a good point. View number 5. Can we add funds to the database? Yeah, you can add your own. You can import a CSV if you have your own list of venture funds, or you can click the Add Investor button or the Add VC Fund button, which are Add VC Fund, and you can just type the name. If they're not in the database, you can still just add them. The only thing is we would not automatically pull the picture or description. But if there's missing data, I'd love to hear that too, because we're always adding to this. View number 19, I've never been limited on LinkedIn searches. Yeah, that's good to know. I haven't been either. I think really they're just trying to prevent bots from scraping LinkedIn. So if you do have some automated stuff, that might be worthwhile. I have not used Sales Navigator. We're trying to get LinkedIn API into Foundersuite. We had it, believe it or not, like 2 years ago. We had LinkedIn's API, and then they shut off their API, and it was like the worst day of not my life, but it was a terrible day. And they have not opened it up to very many since then. I'm really leaning on people I know to try and get APIs, LinkedIn's API. Can you give a flavor of what the Facebook retargeting content would be like? That's a great question. So we really just used in the United States, you have to be careful about like advertising a security. There are lots of laws about this. So like our Facebook ads that we were targeting towards investors were not as explicit as invest in Foundersuite. They were more like, just really kind of a sales pitch about Foundersuite, right? Like, Foundersuite used by 10,000 startups or something like that. I forget exactly what our messaging was. But you really need to avoid like advertising the security. So I would keep it more like a plug for your business, not a direct investment. And then other than that, just, have a interesting statistic or fact, like I think we used by 10,000 startups. That's useful both to customers and also to investors who might get that retargeting ad. Viewer 18, thanks. I appreciate the stuff. I will send out the slides. I'm assuming because you're here, that you accepted the Google Calendar invite. That's the list I'll pull to send the slides out. So if you weren't on the Google Calendar invite, shoot me a note. Here's my contact info, and I'll add you to that. AJ, thanks for upgrading to a paid version. That's, of course, makes my day. Appreciate it. All right, guys, any other questions? Any other questions about, I know it's kind of a long talk, but any other questions about anything related to fundraising? Thanks, Naveen. Well, if no other questions, we can end it here. No problem. My throat is about to go out on me. I'll send these slides out shortly, and you guys are always welcome. My email's right here, Nathan at Foundersuite. If you have questions about anything, happy to help out. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day to all the dads. Call your dad if you're not a dad. You get what I'm saying. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.